Hey guys, I'm continuing work on the 38.7 share side. As you saw in the last installment, I finished cleaning up the tuning cap, and I was working on the coil shields rather. Well, I got those out, got them all cleaned up and polished, reinstalled them, and replaced the grid cap wire here. So, the chassis is coming along nicely. Really just two things left I want to do. One is either rebuild or at least mount the last cap for aesthetics. And I noticed the speaker cord is getting pretty darn crunchy, and we've got some loss of insulation. So I'd like to replace it, but it's got a plug on it, and I'm not entirely sure how to get it apart, or even if it even can come apart without destroying it. So it appears to be a rivet on this side, and it's cardboard, and there's nothing on the other side. So I think to get it apart, you'd have to dig that out. Oh yeah, I suppose I could cut these off somewhere and splice on wires, but it's a little ugly. Now, I do have another one from that spare parts chassis, so I can experiment on that one at least. Anyways, so that's that. Now, as for the tuning mechanism, I decided I am going to go with the nicer one that I salvaged out of a Philco 38.4. So I've got it mounted here, and I'm working on cleaning it up. I already took out the dial cover, which is actually pretty easy to do. It's just a little turn and pull it up. I cleaned up the glass, and this looks like already looks a whole lot nicer. Now I want to get down in there and really clean it, because the actual mechanism, it's pretty filthy, and even a little squeaky. So to clean it, well, I figure I gotta start taking it apart. Now this uses more of those goofy keyed threaded connectors there, so I just went ahead and made myself a little tool. Just took a piece of aluminum tubing and just mashed it on either end, so I can stick a screwdriver on one end, and the other end is shaped to fit over that screw. So I'll just cut this wire off. Just notice the insulation is completely cracked through. So get that out of the way. Put this down in here. Should put it on the other side with the wires not in the way. Well, that's odd. I was wondering why there was only one screw on this side where there were two on the other. Well, this side's completely round. The other side is keyed. Of course, so is the shaft. So, what do we have now? Well, I can clean that on its own. That's easy enough. That's just a counterweight, just a lump of cast aluminum and two pieces of, I think that's leather. So I suppose you take these 4 screws out, and this whole thing will pull off. Because that's really what I want to do. I just want to get down in here and clean out all that grunge. And there's a wire going down through for the dial light. I guess I hadn't. Well, that should come off with the screw. I'll have to untwist it there. Alright, so I'll deal with these wires first. I'll just cut these off, they're falling apart. Alright, so the screws. That'll fit. Alright, that's exactly what I was hoping for. So I shouldn't have to do any more disassembly further than this. I completely get the back side of this, clean out the swing arm, and really clean this up. So when I did an earlier test of this, it worked, but it was very intermittent, and I'm hoping that by cleaning this up, it will work better. The other switch mechanism is inside here, and it's probably a ball bearing in here, just like on the back of a tuning cap. It's just a single ball inside of a cup there, and that's what kind of provides tension against it as you move it in and out. And probably engages on that too. Or no, I guess it doesn't go down that far. Okay. That looks like it's different material, and I bet that's non-conductive, so maybe this brass shaft is part of the switch itself. I thought maybe this collar was something that engaged on the switch, but no, that actually does. That's actually as far as it goes in, so I don't really see that this serves much purpose. Anyways, what I was wondering is there's another switch in here, and boy, if I knew for sure, if I did something like take this nut off, maybe it could be cleaned out. Well, okay, I do have 3 of these now, and one of them is really nasty. Maybe I'll pop that one on the workbench and take these nuts off. I mean, why not? I've got them, and I'm curious, and it'd be nice to know if I could shoot some like deoxit down in here. Might make this work very well. It's also stiff, and I wouldn't mind getting some type of lubrication in there too, or just clean it out. But first off, I'll do the easy thing, which is just to clean this off. And you can see how there's only 6 cones left because I took a bunch of them out. I'm not entirely sure how I did take them out. I know I didn't screw them up much. I think I used something like this. Just put them down into here. So it fits pretty darn well. And then you just give it a twist. Because if I do get this mechanism working well, I wouldn't mind putting the 8 or 10 cones that are missing back in it. Alright, so clean this. I'll give this a try. Electric parts degreaser. Not much left, but I can get this locally pretty cheap, so I can always get more. Yeah, that works real well. This main backing plate is coming along nicely. In case you're wondering, this is what the cones look like when they're taken out of that track. So you put them in here, there's an opening, and you position them accordingly, and then you tighten them down and they lock in place. So when it's like this, you can actually do it with your fingers pretty easily. Now as far as me, if I do want to go through and replace them, I suppose what I can do is once I got this back together, or at least these pieces back together, is to just position the plunger where there's a preset on here and plop down a cone there, and then just hope that when it's back in the radio that things are lined up well enough. And there's also a trimmer on the oscillator on the tuning cap, so that'll probably be okay. But we need a little bit of tweaking. Alright, so then moved on to cleaning up this, and I notice up here is dial light. Kind of a novel little way to mount it, and I was wondering, well, how the heck do you swap that out? Because the positive terminal is this piece of copper, and you don't want to bend this back to get the bulb out, because you'd flex this and it wouldn't provide enough tension when you put it back down, likely. And it looks like what you do is you back this off a little bit and then rotate it, and then it would plop down on this side. But how the heck do you get it out from this side? Well, I took a close look, and it turns out that this comes off rather easily. And it's got a slot on it, so it'll mate back up properly. That side. And this is held in by just this hoop. And this should plop out now. Oh, come on. Set it in. Yeah, now. Huh, I didn't think I was going to go this far, but I see it's actually not that bad to do. I think I will take these 4 screws out, and then I can get the shaft out, because I wanted to get some new lubrication down in there. Now finally, that's how you take your bulb out. So not the easiest thing to do. And no, I'm looking at this, it's probably bad. GE Mazda 44. I think I've got some 44s on hand. Clean some dust out of here too in a minute. With everything taken apart, I was finally able to get in here and spray some deoxidant to the plunger switch assembly. It seems to be working fairly reliably now. So if I go all the way out, works like it should. Intermediate, it stays open. If you go back down, it shorts again. Alright, so time to put it together. Now this is the back dial cover that came with this radio, and it's the one I was about to use, but I thought I'd go through the other ones I've got to pick and choose the best parts. This one came from the grungy tabletop chassis that I'm going to part out, and check out the difference inside. I believe the idea here was they sprayed it metallic silver around where the light bulb goes, and then the rest of it is a little off-white. So I think the idea is the light would get reflected and bounced around in here, and then kind of give it diffused lighting down in here. This one, the paint's really worn off, so I'm going to go with this one. The back sides are pretty much the same condition as where the light bulb goes. I got that contact all cleaned up, so like so. Alright, so I need to take, first off, this, and you notice, in addition to the 4 mounting holes, it's not symmetrical, and they have 2 pegs sticking up. Well, that conveniently locks into these holes down here, so it's pretty easy to figure out how this goes back together, just like that. And I need to put in 4 screws with locking washers. I'm cleaning up the front of the chassis now before I reattach that cone-centric mechanism. In particular, I've got some rust around the controls I want to get rid of. And I also removed this metal plate that was attached here with some sheet metal screws. Now that didn't look right to me from day one when I got this. And when I look back in the cabinet and how this was mounted in there, I think I got it figured out. So originally there was a board in the back that I'm going to fabricate, and that supported it on some rubber cushions. And there were a couple more rubber cushions up top that go through the cone-centric mechanism up here. Now that back plate being gone on mine, these 2 are really not enough to support the weight. So what I think they did is tap some holes in here, drove some sheet metal screws in, and then they built up some wood blocks in the cabinet they attached here. So now we have 1 bolt here where you got the heavy transformer, and then 2 up here, and they removed the rubber cushions up here so these bolts were tight against the cabinet. So it may have held it in there okay, but they're really defeating the whole purpose of this mounting mechanism, which was to float the chassis. You do not want all of this stuff tied tightly together mechanically, because the speaker will vibrate the cabinet, which would then vibrate the chassis, which can get translated into the sound because it'll vibrate the tuning capacitor and actually modulate it. So the chassis is supposed to be floating. 2 rubber cushions on the back, 2 rubber cushions up here. This is going bye-bye. Now, it's probably done a very long time ago, because you can see how I haven't cleaned that. That's how clean it was under there. Cadmium did not get corroded, just like it wasn't underneath where the cone-centric was. Now, these modifications, near as I can tell, were done very long time ago. This was made in 38, let's say. And probably were done in the 40s, maybe even late 30s. I'm not quite sure, but the parts certainly looked very vintagey that were spliced in. There's an ancient turntable that was in this. Fixed speed, 78 RPM only. Alright, so a bit more corrosion to remove, and then we get to the cone-centric mechanism, and here's a little update on that. So here is the mechanism as it currently stands. This is the back plate. Remember, they only had 6 cones left. So I liberated some from the other mechanisms I've got and populated with a full 13, which corresponds to the 13 presets on the dial. I put them in approximately the right places around the perimeter. I know I'll have to adjust them though. So I did a Google search just to see if anybody maybe had an original concentric adjustment tool for sale or tips on making one. And I came across on the Philco repair bench that actually had contact info for someone that made replicas, and they had an email address. So I shot him an email, and I did hear back later in the day, but unfortunately he doesn't have any ready-made to sell, nor does he have the parts to make any, but he did give me detailed tips on how to make one. And it seemed the easiest way to start is to just pick up a cheapo 3/16 inch diameter screwdriver, which is what I ran out and did. Otherwise, if you had just some metal stock that's 3/16, you could use that. But if you use a screwdriver, you get a nice handle on the end. So this is the right diameter to fit down through that. Now, of course, you can't do that right now because there's a screwdriver blade on the end which is flared out. So step 1 is to cut that off flat. And then from there, it will get shaped and ground and filed and whatever it takes to make it so that it will fit into those 2 points on the end. Basically end up being like a 2-pronged fork on the end. So shaft down the center, 2 prongs lock into the cone, counterclockwise loosen it, rotate it around the perimeter, tighten it back down. Alright, so cool. And I used a clean black back plate, put in cones. I used the best of the 3 inner dials, cup I had, and I got this all cleaned up and lubed and working. And then I noticed there's an issue. So this is a fidgety mechanism, to be sure. So there's that rotating contact down there that shorts into that brass plate. And there's this little lever sticking out. And then they got the cone plunger. So if you plunge this not where there's a cone, that contact on the brass remains making contact. It's shorted out. It's muted. When you're over a cone, that little lever that sticks out is supposed to brush up against the cone, so when you push down the plunger, it will trip that up. Cool, great. Works fine on part of the dial. Works fine on the lower 180. Top doesn't work. Why? This is not centered. When you get up to the top, that little lever is supposed to be up much closer to the cone. The end result is that when the plunger goes down, it doesn't engage. It doesn't flip up that contact. So if I have any preset cones up in this area, they're not going to work. Okay, so how does one go about centering it? You don't. everything is locked in place. Screws that go into that center part, which is all die cast, machined with these points. So this part goes into the bottom plate, and there are these two depressions. Those go into those stamped pieces of metal there. And this center part that rotates, no adjustments there, it's just all centered on this keyed shaft. No wiggle room whatsoever. Everything's just supposed to snap together and line up and you're done. So maybe that's why this, some of these, the wires have been cut. Maybe it wasn't so much that the switch inside here didn't work, as that the cones weren't engaging properly anymore. So what am I going to do? Well, since I've gone this far, I'd really like to get this to work properly all around the perimeter. So one last thing I got to try is swapping out the inner mechanism. I'm definitely going to keep this back plate, and I'd like to retain this part, but I don't think either one of those is really well, this certainly isn't going to be the problem. Problem's either got to be this back plate is off center, or the shaft down the center, the part that rotates is off center. Now, maybe, sure, maybe this track is off center, but it's riveted to the back plate. So either there's a manufacturing defect in this back plate somewhere, or in here. Now, there's no wiggle room in this or anything, so I don't think it's like wear over the years that it got to be eccentric. All I can figure is it was made, it was made poorly from the beginning. So this one is really gummed up and really stiff. So I don't think I want to mess with this, which only leaves one more option, which is this one. And I believe this is the one I started with in the radio, and this switch is not working inside. So I'm going to play around with that and see if I can get it to work. Because even if it's centered and the switch doesn't work, then why even bother? Because it may track perfectly around, but if the switch isn't engaging, then I don't care about that, and I'll just cut the red wire and it won't be used anyways. Alright, so let's see how this one works. So now this is at one extreme where it was not working before. So switch is making contact. And now I will, let's see, find a cone here. And push the plunger. And hey, it pops up. Cool. Let's try the other extreme. A cone here. The switch pop up. Yep. Alright, now let's go down towards the bottom where most of the presets are going to be being, so that's where most of the stations are, not at the edges of the dial, but in the middle. And let's see, like right here. Yeah, not great, but yeah. Okay, now here's the very bottom of the dial, and no, in fact that little lever is sticking out so far it's starting to bump into the cones. So this one has the opposite problem. This one is a little bit too far down. So the first one I tried was off center this way, and this one's off center the other way. So fantastic. Fantastic. Well, there is this one which is grungy and I didn't want to mess with because it's so stiff, but I can probably flush that out and get some grease done in there and get it rotating. Don't know if the switch works. Yeah, this one's really, not only is it rusty, there's kind of crud on here, but it's brass corrosion too. That part is always outside of the mechanism, so it probably doesn't really matter. If I had to, if I can't make any sense out of that, I think I would just go back to this one, because as I said, most of the presets are down in this area. where this one I've got in here now, it's got trouble down in here. And this one works well down through this range, but not at the fringe end of either end of the dial. So like AM560WIND, that cone wouldn't work. But things like WGN or AM1000, so on, the ones in the center of the dial, those would work well. Well, here it is all back together again. And this is the best combination I could find. Still not perfect, but all the cones except for a small arc at the extremes seem to work well enough. Alright, so I'm going to put that aside, and now I'm going to take the first step in making that tool, which is to cut off the end of the screwdriver. I use a Dremel tool and one of these Easy Lock metal cutting discs. Come with this adapter, makes it real easy to use. You just push down, and if you just pull it down, you pop the disc on, and rotate it 90 degrees, and it locks in, and you're good to go. And this cuts metal really well. The downside, of course, is little bits of metal go all over the place, so I'm going to cover up my work area and cut it off. Alright. And I've got eye protection on, and let's see, well, it doesn't really need to be anywhere near this long, because it really just going through, about that long would be good enough. But I want to leave some extra length, so maybe cut it off around here. Plus, if I screw up, I want to have, be able to take a few more whacks at it. Cleanest job, but it's good enough. Most of this is going to get ground and filed off anyways. And let's see. Yep. Absolute perfect size. 3/16. It's right down the center. Okay, enough about the cone-centric mechanism. I want to get this radio back up and playing again. So, another task I want to complete is to restuff this other filter cap. Got this one already done. 2 caps inside. Got it mounted back on there. Now, this is just a single section. Now, what's kind of scary is it still has liquid in it. I don't think I've ever cut one of these open that wasn't bone dry and the goo came out the end. Now, I don't have to rebuild it. I could leave the cap mounted underneath and just stick this back up here, but at the very least, I want to drain that fluid out, because eventually it's going to find its way out, leak all over inside the chassis and make a mess. So I could just drill a hole on the bottom and let it dribble out. Or, like I did on the other one, I can cut it off around here, because a clamp will hold it back together and hide that. But another way to do these is to take the top off, to cut it right along this seam. Use a real sharp utility knife. Soft aluminum that sharpened steel will cut through it pretty quickly. And pop the top off, pour out all the insides, unplug the end, take my new cap and run some extension wires on it and have the positive and negative leads come out the end. Now originally, when this was positive and the can was negative, it was not just directly clamped to the chassis. This negative does not go to ground, it goes to the bias resistor network. So by running 2 wires, insulated wires out the base, I don't have to worry about that. I can just clamp this like this and let the can be grounded, no problem. Alright, so because this has fluid in it, I am not going to do it on my workbench. I don't want to have a little lake here, so I'm going to take it over to the utility sink and nick that and let the stuff inside ooze out, which is probably some type of borax solution. That's what they used in the Mershon type caps, and this is the successor to those, the wet type electrolytic. I got the cap cut off the capacitor quite easily, and yeah, there was quite a bit of fluid in there. Just all came pouring out. And here's what was left inside. So here is the positive of the capacitor. Then there's an insulating mesh around the inside to keep this from brushing up against the outer can, which is the negative. So that's all there is to it. And they have this made of this folded up aluminum to increase the surface area. That is how you determine capacitance. It's a function of I was able to cut off that top cap quite easily, and quite a bit of fluid did come out, so I'm glad I did it over a sink. And here's what I found inside. Outer insulating material, and then the inner part. So this is the anode, and then made it up with this corrugated, accordioned aluminum foil to increase the surface area, which increases the capacitance. So this is the anode, insulator, and cathode. This is the actual metal body of the capacitor. So I've got that all washed out. Here is my new capacitor. I'll run a couple extension wires off of it down through the hole in the bottom, and then it's a matter of how do I want to reattach the cap. Well, could throw a little super glue on there, I suppose. I saw one suggestion online to take the underside and glue something to it. Find something of the right diameter, like if you find a large piece of cork, say, such that you could glue it to the inside of this, and then it would just slip snugly back onto the can, and if you ever needed to get it back open, you could just pull it off. Alright, here it is all back together and fired up. Here's a rebuilt cap. Got all the tubes installed and tube shields. And it's playing okay, but not great. It's not as loud or as sensitive as I think it should be. So in the next installment, I will be attempting an alignment. And I will also see about fabricating the missing piece of wood that would support this radio properly in the cabinet.